Scales and Pages. Written by Nikolai Weiskopf. Read for you by Adam R. Watson. Story 1. The Likely Thief. They are the sand. We are the glass. But time is the only true immortal. Valstus remembered his mother's words rumbling through his shell. From hatchling to youth, he'd witnessed their weighty truth in many forms. A fallen friend, an enemy slain, nations saved, discoveries made. Every memorial raised to them slowly crumbling with age. All their legacies fade from the world's memory, but remain crystal clear to him. Centuries of these moments awoke a draconic instinct to hoard the stories of the world. Decades of effort and mountains of gold spent had filled his distant mountain cavern with tomes on every subject. With careful claws, he'd carved smooth shelves into the walls. With spells, he'd formed round stone stages where his favorites were always at hand to read. Over time, the scents of aged parchment and ink soaked the cavern stone. A glorious collection that faced threats only magic could stop. For years he'd waged war on molds, rats, mites, and damp. Every victory was bittersweet. For every 10 books saved, one would always slip through his claws. He mourned each one. Vowing to find a solution, reading and rereading his many grimoires inspired a plan to create an immortal masterpiece. For weeks, he worked his claws and magics in gentle harmony on a gemstone matching his deep sapphire scales. Coiled around his steel workstation, wings itching to feel the wind under them. He flapped them once, sending a gust that echoed off the walls. Ignoring the sounds and whine of his stiff muscles, he explored the spells he'd cast inside the gem. An intricate web of power thrummed in answer to his questing mind, inviting him to enter a world within a world. Each slice of his talons carved a new facet, allowing his mind to enter a dark expanse. A single thought creates lights. Another raises long crystalline rows. All at once, deep cuts form shelves. Signs of solid silver engraved with sapphire enamel take shape above the aisles. Necromancy, elemental, physical, spectral. Many more schools of magic appear, each of their aisles forming a timeline. It pained him to isolate the magic histories and grimoires, but if he ever had a guest, they didn't need the temptation of unimaginable power. He retreated from the gem, stretched out the crick in his neck, and looked to the hole he'd carved into the cavern's ceiling. Moonlight instead of sunlight greeted him. His hoard bathed in the faint glow of cavern fungi. Soon you will all be safe from damp, dust, and time, he declared to the neatly sorted multitude of books. In the back of the cavern, the grimoires answered him with multicolored flashes of magic. He snorted in answer, a puff of mist and lightning rising into the stalactites. They were the most resilient and dramatic books he'd hoarded over the centuries. The bloody, chaotic memories eased the guilt in his mind, and allowed him to prepare the last step in binding the gemstone library. Born from the world, to my blood and magic, I bind you, he declared. With razor claws, he pricked through the scales of his palms. Silver blood pooled in his hands. The moment the stone touches Valstus's blood, the cavern erupted in a maelstrom of light. The magics of the hidden world absorbed his blood facet by facet. Sharp details of the world blurred. His muscles, pinning his wings to his back, surrendered, leaving them splayed out. He forced himself to breathe and continued turning the gem. "To my blood and magic, I bind you!" he roared out. The cavern trembled in answer. Valstus slumped over the steel table, both hands tightly gripped on his new hoard and lair. Hunger and sleep demanded his attention. The thought of hunting helped his eyes shut faster. Sleep was moments away. Then he heard someone breathing. "Fascinating," an excited voice echoed through the cavern. Valstus groaned into a growl. His vision faded in and out of focus as he searched for the intruder. "No need for fury. It's just not every day I witness such magic." The voice trembled as it rushed through the words. The fog of exhaustion and low mana is slow to leave Valstus's mind, but he realized the echoes are not natural. Each time, they came from all directions. "Show yourself, mage!" he demanded, and stomped. His claws raked through the stone, throwing up clouds of dust. "Only if you swear to respect the ancient laws of courtesy," the echo answered. Valstus stopped snaking his head back and forth. It was a carefully worded request that didn't bind the mage's magic. It also left Valstus free to use his own, but his mana was painfully low. "And you will respect those laws as well?" Valstus asked. Tense moments of low whistling sounds, rustling pages, faint water drips follow. None of it eased the itch under his scales. "I, Archmagus Arceus Magistoris, will respect the ancient laws of guest and host," he answered and floated down from the shadows of the stalactites, landing on golden puffs of air. No wrinkles betrayed his age, but his temples were silver, while the rest of his hair was neatly trimmed jet black. Valstus's eyes raked over the mage, noting his lack of armor and wiry frame. "Is he depending entirely on magic?" he silently wondered. Then he noticed the man's well-worn boots matched his practical clothing and discounted that possibility. Likely he planned to use speed and agility. The silence stretched until Arceus cocked an eyebrow. "I, Child of Storms, Valstus Narex, will respect the ancient laws of guest and host," he finally answered. Every moment he fought to keep his head steady and refused to shut his eyes. Mages and dragons came in many colors and egos, but few favored the subtle. The ones that did were deadly devious. The echo spell was the first clue which kind Arceus was. His cloak was the second. It didn't rest on his shoulders like fabric. Instead, it shifted in waves and points as it crossed with the fungi light. A shadow cloak. "Your caution is wise, if misplaced. I've spent decades learning I'd sooner burn my staff than a book." Arceus laid said staff on his palms and offered it out to Valstus. Hatchling naivety tugged inside the dragon's heart to believe the old mage, but the staff was a third clue that warned him. A quick sniff filled his nose with sweet oils that failed to hide the iron stink of dried blood. Slowly he slithered his tufted tail under his work desk and curled it around a raw mana potion. It wouldn't make them even, but he'd be less exhausted. "Then you won't mind if I replenish myself?" Valstus asked. Arceus spun the staff till it rested behind his head. "Not at all. Please do." He smiled, his waxed whiskers flexing with the expression. Valstus gulped down the potion, doing his best to not choke on the liquid fire in his mouth and throat. His thoughts and vision cleared. "It's better to sip than swallow," Arceus said. His smile shifted to a parental concern most races showed naughty children. Valstus snapped his jaws. "This isn't your academy, and I'm not a student. Keep your lectures to yourself," he said, and laid the gemstone library on the work desk. Archaeus' expression of concern soured into a disapproving glare, but he thankfully stayed silent. With the new mana in his gut, Valstus willed the closest books over. One by one, they answered. As they approached the gemstone, his shed scale in the book's spine shined, resonating with the library's magic. He allowed himself to smile as the most recent edition of Species of the World hovered above its facet. A brief beam of light flashed and sucked the book into the gem. By habit, he nearly cast his mind into the gem to make sure it was in the right section and on the right shelf, but exposing his back to an archmage would make him more brainless than an amoeba. Valstus snorted vapor and lightning before allowing the next book to float over its facet. Tyranny and Blood landed in history. Memories of lightning bolts sizzled across his mind. When he saw the title Forging Ahead, he stopped it and passed a single claw over its aged leather. The author was a smith who traded Valstus an apprenticeship for being taught how to write. It was one of the longest times he'd appeared human. It went to the educational facet. Dragons of myths and legend sorted into fiction. The amount of errors disqualified it from any academic facets. Archaeus paced back and forth before loudly tisking. "That is excellent control over distance, height, and thrust, but—" He trailed off, the silence filled with tension. Valstus sighed as a massive line of fiction floated into the library. One brightly colored anthology with a court jester on its cover inspired the dragon to break the silence. "What's wrong, Archie? Is your point so sharp it's stuck in your throat?" he asked, in his best innocent voice. The Archmage's pale blue eyes bulged wide as saucers as his cheeks flushed red as tomatoes. "Not at all," he coughed and cleared his throat. "Just that the amount of mana you're using leaves a lot to be desired," he said, and stroked his waxed whiskers. "And if my mana was as finite as yours, you'd have a valid point," Valstus shot back. Silently, he hoped his teeth sold his lie. The last of the ancient histories sank into the gem's light. "Thankfully, it is not," he added, and pointed at the pile of alchemic sciences. Archaeus' layers of wrinkles and many crow's feet turned crimson. "Well, if I lived as long as you, mine would be far greater," he sniped. Itchy irritation spread down Valstus's spine from Archaeus's naked, petty arrogance. Unable to scratch, it split his attention and disrupted the serenity of his magic. Every book floating towards the library dropped an inch. He corrected by burning through more of his finite mana. "A perfect example of what my teachings could improve," Archaeus said, and floated down to eye level with Valstus. "An easy bargain. My knowledge for yours," he finished, his hands rising and falling like scales. For moments, only the sound of wind and pops of books being sucked into the gem filled the cavern. The motes of naive trust of Valstus died, but if he outright refused, fireballs would fly. "And what knowledge do you want?" he asked. The mage's pale blue eyes flicked towards the grimoires at the back of the cavern. "Despite your youth, the wealth of magical knowledge you've collected is enviable," Archaeus answered without answering. He twirled his staff and held out a hand. "A lesson in mana manipulation is not worth my entire hoard." "Which grimoire did you want?" Valstus asked, and tapped his claws on his desk, filling the cavern with a steady steel chime. Archaeus's face pinched, and his open hand balled into a fist. "I am taking Vizirath's skull as payment," he declared. Vulstus managed one breath before shadow-ridden blue light flooded the cavern. Mage and dragon both turned towards the source. An aged, engraved skull with sapphire eyes floated towards them. Silently, Vulstus apologized to his books and released the floating spell. The cavern echoed with the crack of spines and flipped pages. With his mana freed, he shaped spectral chains that snapped and wrapped around Vizirath's skull. They pulled it back, slammed it into solid stone, and trapped it in a skull-shaped crater. The tainted light faded. Vulstus extended a wing and blocked the grimoires from Arceus. "Get out!" Vulstus commanded. "Out of all the names you invoke, a necromancer who bled a kingdom dry!" Standing to his full height, he willed ice to rise in his throat, pulled lightning from the air, and gathered it in his jaws. The air hissed and crackled viciously. Arceus only rolled his eyes. "Knowledge is knowledge. Whether it is bloody or clean is philosophy at best, and wasted moralizing at worst. However, if you want your hoard to stay intact, I would mind my manners." Arceus raised one finger to the cavern's stalactites. The elemental fury continued to gather until Vulstus noticed glowing amber lines wrapped across the cavern's ceiling. One thought towards the magic told him what spell Arceus had prepared. Break. With one gesture, the mage had turned every stalactite into a stone spear. "As I said before, I find pointless destruction abhorrent. However, keeping myself alive to further the magical sciences is a worthy cause," Arceus rationalized, and floated over Vulstus's wing toward the distant wall. The dragon's mind raced with questions. Could he disrupt the earth magic to save his books? How many tons of mountain stone would it take to crush him? Was it worth destroying everything just to stop Arceus? It was the same answer every time. No. He snarled and released the lightning and ice in his jaws. "Glad to see you can be reasonable." Arceus turned around to float backwards as he lectured, a fox-like grin on full display. When he came to Vizirath's skull, he tapped the spectral chains with his staff. They dispelled with a pop of air. The engraved relic tumbled from the wall into the Archmage's waiting hands. "While I'm here, I might as well take everything I need," he said, and dropped the skull into the shadows at his feet. Vulstus gasped as his constant thread of connection to the grimoire stretched into an endless chain. He followed it with his mind, and found nothing but darkness. One by one, other grimoires joined the skull in that unknown dark. Vulstus did not argue. Instead, he resumed the floating spell on the fallen books. He ignored which facet took them in. All that mattered was getting them away from Arceus. "Aha!" the old mage declared, and held up a green leather grimoire lined with red vines. "I thought these burned during the purges." "Thank you!" he shouted, dropping it into his shadows. Vulstus caught glimpses of midnight black, golden yellow, and ashen grey. Eventually, the shadows at Arceus's feet started swallowing entire stacks of grimoires. Feeling for the shed scale in the spines, he burned their names into his memory. "These should keep me going for a few centuries," Arceus said, temples shiny with sweat, his foxy grin widened to an unnerving length. "Once I'm done with them, I'll make sure you get them back," he said. Vulstus snorted in disbelief. Now, no need to be surly," Arceus chided, and tossed aside the grimoires he didn't care about. Every thud landed on Vulstus' dying caution and patience. "While I have your undivided attention, let's discuss overcoming our baser instincts, Arceus said, and threw a grimoire over his head. The draconic drive to hoard is much like a shark following blood. It would be much nobler if you shared this wealth with everyone. In fact, I believe my academy would... Arceus' prattle faded into a distant drone. The dragon didn't care anymore. This preening, lecturing, greedy ass threatened to shatter his hoard. Enough was enough. Letting all the books fall again, Valstus immediately sent a burst of mana that yanked on all the remaining grimoires. A barrage of metal, leather, and parchment shot past and through Arceus. Ow! One smacked his buttocks. Why, you... Another clipped against his ribs. This is... He couldn't finish, as more smacked him from head to heels. All of them sailed straight into the gemstone library. The moment the light dimmed and he knew they were safe, Valstus glared at the grumbling old mage. Just for that, you will never see them again, he snarled, tapped his staff on nearby shadows, and sank into the dark. The amber magic on the stalactites faded with his disappearance. Valstus roared out everything he'd held back. Unleashed rage frosted the cavern walls. Cold panic in his belly crackled in tiny bolts between his teeth. His claws raked through ancient stone like clay. By the end, the sounds had cracked the oldest stones in the cavern. All of it compelled him to act. He gulped down multiple mana potions and pulled in every book. Multiple facets flashed, titles and memories raced by. Everything rational and organized failed to stop him. All he wanted, all he needed was for them to be safe. Several hours passed. His eyes hurt. His wings drooped by his sides. Lifeless gray tinged his brilliant sapphire scales. Unwillingly he collapsed, cradling his library hoard. Closing his eyes against the pain of being awake, he hatched a plan. He'd travel, find new books, hunt down Arceus, take back his grimoires. We thank you for listening to this story. Creating the dragons, books, and magic and shenanigans has been a joy. Find more of Nikolai's stories and Adam's content in the links enclosed. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by an electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without permission in writing from the publisher, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review. No general